Hey there troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and something that's recently been discussed a lot in the community is balancing between PC and console. I think it's really important that regardless of what platform you play, you should be getting a pretty good experience with Battlefield 5. Playing on the PlayStation 4 Pro especially showed me that the game's in a really good state on some of the newer consoles and will look and run really well. But in terms of balancing and core gameplay mechanics, there's definitely a disconnect between what's going on PC and what is going on console. As somebody who is playing on both platforms and pretty hardcore as well, I think I have a very unique perspective on this. For me, PC is a place where I play all of my hardcore shooters. I play games like Squad, I play some Rainbow Six, Postscriptum, games like that are super intense and require a lot of attention, a lot of skill in terms of recoil compensation and things like that. So I'm very much equivalent and used to the scene when it comes to PC, and it's something that I definitely transferred some skills into when playing Battlefield 5 there. But alongside that, most of you will know me as somebody who plays on PlayStation 4 as well. This is something that I have done a lot of in the past, it's something I'm planning on doing a lot of in the future, and I do have an appreciation for how console plays, and I do kind of enjoy using a controller in some scenarios. So today I want to talk about balancing, and I want to talk about why specifically there is definitely a need for balancing to be done separately on PC and console. Now this is something that I know a lot of you talk about because it's just a big important factor of the game. Balancing is fundamentally important to how the game handles, and it's fundamentally important to the enjoyment of your experience. Nobody likes there being overpowered weapons or things that simply don't make sense because it just ruins the whole core dynamic of gameplay. If you're constantly being murdered by an STG-44 from across the map, well, that just doesn't make for a very enjoyable experience at all. And I want to give you some examples to break off with that kind of show that balancing definitely does need to be done differently. So the first one in my opinion is the MP40. I think the MP40 represents a good idea of why balancing definitely should be done in two very different ways. As somebody who compensates recoil on both PC and console and knows how to do so, I felt that the recoil compensation on PC was far too easy and that the gun definitely didn't jump around enough in terms of moving the mouse downwards to compensate for what was happening. But when trying to mimic the same kind of compensation on controllers, I very much noticed that the MP40 did jump around a lot more, and it actually made it a much more difficult and challenging weapon to use, and I was definitely sticking towards certain engagement ranges more than others, because the gun would jump around quite a lot horizontally and a little bit vertically as well, even though it was very clear that I was trying to accomplish the same degree of compensation. My stick dead zones aren't exactly high either, so I was more or less expecting the same result. But in terms of just simple one-to-one gameplay, a mouse will always be fundamentally more accurate than a control analog stick, and regardless of how skillful you are, or how many years you've played shooters on either platform, there will always be some degree where certain weapons will just operate in different ways, and this was very much understood in games like Battlefield Hardline, where they did eventually do the balancing completely differently for both platforms. Now the MP40 is just one example, and that example I personally felt handled as it should have on console, but didn't handle how it should have on PC. It definitely should have been much more difficult to use on that platform. But the STG is also a very clear one. Now fundamentally the STG does need a lot of work. It's ridiculously overpowered, and it works at any given range regardless of what platform you're on. It was very easy to laser beam people with the STG on both PC and PS4, regardless of their distance, and just simple tap fire or single fire mechanisms, it was just too powerful. That's the simple way of saying it. But in terms of controlling it, there was definitely a discrepancy here too. It almost felt like it wasn't too far away from being okay on console. Like, in terms of difficulty of controlling recoil, there were some instances where I did just get it wrong, or I panicked a little bit, or the situation didn't quite go my way because I just didn't quite get the compensation right. There's definitely a sweet spot with every weapon in terms of what you should be doing, and there were some scenarios where I, even with an upgraded one, just wasn't doing the job, and that's kind of what you want. You want a situation where, you know, there are more decision factors based around you and your abilities as opposed to based on what the game is providing for you. But on PC that just simply wasn't the case. Again, with a relatively good mouse and keyboard setup like I have here at home, it was just far too easy to slightly pull down on my mouse and just make everything an absolute breeze. And this is something, again, that just represents the huge divide that we have here. I think another big one as well is certain gadgets. Gadgets in the game definitely have to operate differently too, because on PC you can throw dynamite really far just like you can on console, but on PC you can turn your sensitivity and mess around with your DPI in a way that if you wanted to, you could pull out a dynamite stick, slam up your DPI by pressing a button, quickly spin around, throw it out, and then detonate it, and that would be more or less that. But on console, because, you know, there's no messing around with DPI settings and there only is dead zones and sensitivities, even if you were to try and mess around with those, you would reach a point where it would be unnaturally high, and having the ability to throw a dynamite stick like that incredibly quickly would just fundamentally undermine all of your other aiming mechanisms like aiming and shooting, because you can't press a button or press a hotkey to make that happen. It's something that just is in-game settings, and you'd have to literally go back into the menu and mess with the settings again to get something like that to work, which is just a complete waste of time. And I think it's very obvious as well, you know, like things like DPI buttons, things like extra mouse buttons, would probably require some gadgets to have a slower pullout time or slower activation time on PC, because you can just literally slam up that DPI really fast and lob it into the middle of nowhere, and that would work. It's a perfectly viable tactic. It's something I definitely tried doing with Dynamite on PC. I definitely tried using the middle mouse button that I have, which is locked to DPI, to see if I could quickly spin around faster in comparison to what I previously would use with aiming. And I think there are lots of examples of things like hotkeys and DPI potentially changing how gadgets should work. Finally, and this one's for me, I think it's just sniper rifles. Sniper rifles and semi-automatic rifles as well simply just should not be balanced the same. Because a sniper rifle and a semi-automatic rifle is much harder to hit on a console than it is to land on a PC. If you use a mouse and keyboard, you can laser beam people with sniper rifles because you literally just have to point and click, and it will go exactly where you aim. There is no discrepancy with that. But there's always a degree of error when you're using an analog stick, which is something which isn't accounted for in balancing at all. And it definitely made certain rifles like the Gewehr feel somewhat underpowered and not as useful as they were on PC. And I wouldn't say the sniper rifles were underpowered on console, but I think they were definitely a lot easier to use on PC, so maybe brush up the difficulty for them in some respects as well. That's it for my thoughts today, troops. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon in the next video.